Hi, we're going to make a short animation using some basic standard primitives and a sequence of rigid bodies. I'll just refer to the outliner straight away and you'll see the word rigid body here attached to that sphere, and then we've got rigid bodies attached to the cubes as well. Okay, I'll show you how to do that. It's really straightforward, very simple. We're also going to use gravity fields, which are basically going to be simulating gravity, obviously. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. I'll just rewind the animation. So back to the start, hit play, sequence of objects should fall, and you can freeze this at any moment. Do a quick render. Okay, get the picture. Okay, so let's see how this works. It's pretty straightforward, but I'll just go through a few little features first of all. So rewind. One thing that you need to do from the start is just go down to this little fellow in the corner who's got like a little cog on his back. Looks like he's running away from the cog. Click on him, and I've set the frame rate to 25 frames a second, and I've also set the playback speed to 25 frames a second. Failure to do this, I found, if you leave it on play every frame, you get some pretty crazy results. So just change that to 25 times 1, 25 frames a second there. Okay, that'll keep you in good stead. So I'll just hit save. And the other thing is, I've got the length of my animation at 200 frames, so at 25 frames a second, and 200 frames in total length. Okay, so just run it one more time. There we go. Alright, so what we're doing, we'll add a few things to this animation and then you can see how it works. Okay, so let's add a new sphere to the animation. So let's create a new sphere. And polygon and sphere, create it in the middle. I'm going to lift it up to there, and I'll give it a name from the off, and I'll call it new sphere. Okay. Ooh. And I'm going to try and spell that correctly as well. New sphere. Okay, there you go. Okay, so obviously at this moment in time, rewind, hit play. New sphere is going to do nothing, because we haven't as yet added a field solver. If you can't see the field solvers, it's probably because you haven't at this point changed the mode over to FX. So you've got modeling, rigging, animation, etc. Go to FX, layout, and then your field solvers will be available. And because we want this sphere to fall on the ground and bounce, we're going to call it an active rigid body. So you've got to apply that. Now when I go to the outliner and look at my new sphere, inside it you can see the sphere itself and the newly added rigid body. Okay, this rigid body, when I click on it and look inside the attribute editor over here, tells me that this object has a mass of 1. Okay, and it's got things like static friction, dynamic friction, bounciness, damping, etc. We can experiment with that later, but let's just nail the basics. So let's increase that mass to say 3 for this one. Okay, now it's not going to work as yet. I'll just rewind and show you. Even though I've added the rigid body and I've changed the mass of the object, it still isn't going to work until one of the other objects hits it. Okay, so why is it not falling in the first instance? So it just sits there until, remember, one of the other active rigid bodies clatters into it. And the reason is we need to give it gravity. So click on gravity and you'll see it adds a gravity field over here in the outliner. Now when I hit rewind, it falls just like the rest and behaves just like the rest. Okay, so there's a few little things that we can do here. So let's stop that animation, rewind it, go back, select the actual sphere itself, and I want to go to the channel box. Okay, so select the new sphere, and I'm going to go to the channel box. I'm just going to look at the settings. So we know it's got a mass of 3. I'm going to make that a mass of 5. I'm going to leave the bounciness and damping, etc. exactly where it is. But I'm going to say that it's initially, when it starts, it's going to have an initial spin on the z-axis, not for any particular reason, but on the z-axis of 5. And I'll give it a backward spin on the x-axis of 8. Okay. And I could give it a little upward velocity. So unlike 3ds Max, in Maya the y-axis is actually pointing upward. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say -5 on the y. Now what should happen, if I've got this right, possibly I've got it wrong, but what should happen when I rewind it and hit play, it should just rise slightly before it starts descending, and it should have a little spin on it. Well, it didn't really do that. Perhaps the mass is too great for that initial upward velocity. Let's just double check that. So I'll say -20 to begin with, and let's have a little look. Okay, so here we go. Reset, and that is complete nonsense. Okay, let's find out why that's not going right. Okay, so I must be going in the wrong direction here, so it's not -20, it's got to be +20, or let's reduce it, let's just put in something like +8. And now it should get a little tiny rise before it descends, and initial spin, I'm just going to increase that initial spin a little bit up to something like, oh no, 12, just to get it going. Okay, rewind and play. Let's just see that again. Stop that, and oh, didn't change it. Okay, so my initial velocity should be 8. I don't know how I thought I changed it, but I didn't. So it should be a little rise before it descends, and there it is, and a little rise and a slight turn as well. So my initial spin, I'm going to increase that 30, and rewind, do it again. There's a little spin. That's it. Okay, fine. So you get the point. It's got a rigid body attached to it. It's active, and if I just go back to my attribute editor and go to the new sphere, click on rigid body, you can see it's an active rigid body. Very good. Okay, the one on the ground plane, in effect, I'll just choose my ground plane, open it up and show it to you. It's the same process. I've added a rigid body, but this one, it was a passive rigid body, and you can see, looking at the ground plane, looking at its rigid body, it's not currently active. It's a passive rigid body. So anything you don't want to move and receive objects falling onto it, for example, is just a passive rigid body. Okay, so but the other ones are active, and they need to have a gravity field in order to activate them. And then once they're activated, it's just a case of going to the actual individual rigid body, like I showed you a moment ago, looking at its mass, bounciness, damping, etc. And if you want to do it if you want to do groups together as well, you can do. So like I could change all those cubes and change their properties all at the same time by selecting them in the outliner, going to the channel box, and I could change perhaps their scale or the gravity or the mass in here. So they've all got a mass of 10. I could change it here on mass to speed things up. Okay, that's 9:25. That's pretty fast. I think everything's been covered. Don't forget the little guy in the corner with the cog on his back. He has to be changed to 25 frames or 24. Sorry, it could be 24, but we're running at 25 frames per second, so change the frame rate and change the playback speed. And then obviously on top of that, I've gone into the hypershade, which I'll just pull that up on the screen, which you're now familiar with, and I've added standard surface Arnold shader. So one for each one for the cubes, one for the ground, one for the sphere. They're just presets which I'm not currently using, so I've really just added those three. If you want to examine them, right click on them and just choose the graph network, and there it is. Okay, so you're used to doing the basic Arnold shader, so apply some materials to it, and lastly, to get the scene illuminated, I've added an Arnold lights and sky dome, and I've done nothing to it, just clicked it in the scene, and there it is in the outline. So it's got an Arnold sky dome, we've got Arnold shader. Oh, there's one other little thing I did do actually. I was using my perspective window, and I just kind of, as I've said to you before, I kind of like that kind of 3/4 view, so I've just got a nice angle onto the scene. And once I set my perspective view up, I went to this little view drop down menu here, and I chose create camera from view, and then that just creates a camera specifically where you want it to be. So there it is, perspective 2, and what I can do is I can just rename that. Where's my little rename option? Not sure, but I can rename it over here in my editor. So we'll call that, I'll just call that main camera. I obviously did that before and deleted it, but there you go, it's back in the scene. Main camera, so main camera, sky dome. I'll take out the new sphere object, don't need that now, don't need that third gravity field because that was the new sphere one. And not sure what that is, to be honest. That little perspective ground, I think that was a view that I was using previously. Let's have a little look. Not messed anything up, I hope. And there's my little scene. Okay, nice. Now I'll save the rendering out process for another animation, for another video. It's enough to get this up and running, get it textured and lit, and experiment with the various settings. Okay, we'll talk about rendering it out in various forms in another video. Okie doke, over and out.